Is that him? I heard it from the hallway, right before the double glass doors of the Paragon Tech boardroom clicked shut behind me. 8 chairs turned in unison. One of them belonged to Marco Fields, still tan in winter, still wearing that smug little timeshare smirk like he invented it. Only now it cracked. Not broke, cracked. Like a windshield hit by something sharp and fast and unexpected. Let me rewind. 2 hours earlier, was standing barefoot in my kitchen in a rental condo 3 zip codes outside their glass castle, eating cereal out of a measuring cup. Suit jacket hung on a chair, coffee was reheating in the microwave for the 3rd time. My dog, Finn, part retriever, part existential crisis, was licking peanut butter off my pitch notes. The invite on my phone glowed like some final boss achievement. Q1 Integration Review. Presentations by ARX Systems. Still didn't know. Didn't know I was ARX Systems. Didn't know their entire ops stack was balancing on code I wrote at 2 a.m. between mental breakdowns and ramen dinners. Didn't know the real reason their partner company had refused in-person meetings for 2 years. They thought I was just a tech vendor. Another faceless cog. God, how I smiled. But the real beginning, it wasn't the boardroom. Wasn't even Marco's laugh when he called my original prototype software, built in a garage by someone's cousin with a head injury. It was the morning after they rejected me, when I woke up to find a PDF anonymously forwarded to my inbox. Subject line, they're using your code. Attached, an internal Paragon Tech architecture slide. And there it was, Sluice's spine. Same data tree, same failover patterns. Same bloody bugs I hadn't fixed yet. Didn't pass, they pirated. At first, I thought maybe I was losing it, that I was overreacting. But then came the Slack screenshots. Someone leaked them. Conversations between Marco and his team. We'll just tweak it enough to avoid noise. Change the UI, slap a different logo on it, he'll never know. I knew, but I didn't scream. Didn't email, didn't threaten lawyers I couldn't afford. I watched, built, waited. Because revenge isn't served cold. It's served publicly. Slides and a Q&A. On the projector, with espresso in hand and your enemy pinned to their own whiteboard. That's why I said yes to the invite. That's why I arrived early. That's why my deck wasn't just a product roadmap. Slide 8? Slide 8 was going to detonate the room. But I hadn't even gotten to slide 1 before Tyler, the intern strategist who once mocked my demo, stood up and said, "Wait. I know you." That's when Marco's jaw didn't just drop. It locked. He didn't speak. Not at first. Just stared, his eyes doing this frantic side-to-side flick like he was searching for a version of reality where I wasn't real. His mouth hung slightly open, but no air came out. You'd think he'd seen a ghost. No, worse, he saw a reckoning. Tyler sat back down so fast his chair screeched. One of the board members leaned over to whisper, but the silence swallowed the sound. No one moved. The only thing that dared to breathe in that room was the little USB drive I placed on the table with a soft clack. Chrome, clean. Labeled in blue tape, Sluice Backup Final. Marco's eyes dropped to it, blinked. That's not possible, he finally muttered. I clicked the remote. Slide 1, a flowchart. Complex, industrial, familiar, too familiar. Paragon Tech's current backend stack visualized. The system they called Flux Bridge. Their pride and joy. Billion-dollar artery. Except the file name at the bottom corner said, Tracefire Sluice v3.1 4-Bear PNG. One of the execs squinted. Wait, Tracefire? That's ours? No, I said. That's mine. I didn't smile. I let them catch up. Watched the realization spread like rot. Marco looked like a man trying to wake up from a nightmare that smelled exactly like the conference room he was trapped in. I clicked again. Slide 2 was a screenshot of the Slack conversation they thought they deleted, archived, and timestamped, featuring Marco himself saying, "Just tweak enough to bury the code signature. No one'll know." A murmur started, low and nervous. One board member turned to Marco. "You said Flux Bridge was built in-house." He didn't respond. He couldn't, because slide 3 had already appeared. An animated comparison of the original Sluice functions next to their current Flux Bridge modules, line by line. Even the bugs were identical. Down to the typo in the error handler, receive data instead of receive. The CTO in the corner paled. Jesus, Marco, but it didn't stop there. Slide 4 showed their own licensing payments for the last 18 months, all routed through shell entities, ultimately traceable back to ARX Systems. Back to me. That's when the COO stood up. "Are you saying we've been paying the guy you told us was a joke?" "I'm saying," I said, stepping forward, "that this joke owns every line of code your company depends on, that every invoice you paid funded the very system you tried to bury. And now I'm here, not as your vendor, but as your compliance auditor, because your license is up for renewal." I paused. I don't think you can afford the price. Someone dropped their pen. The air pressure in the room changed. Marco's jaw finally closed, but only because he clenched it hard enough to crack a molar, and we were just getting started. I let the silence ferment. Let it settle in their overpriced suits like the scent of something rotten just discovered under the floorboards. Marco leaned forward, elbows on the table, knuckles white. Looked like a man cornered in a house he thought he built, only to realize the deed was never in his name. You're bluffing, he said finally, voice hoarse. You can't prove ownership. Click. Slide 5. Patent certificate. Filed under a small Wyoming LLC. Dates aligned perfectly. Registered code-base fingerprint. Even the notary's signature scanned in crisp detail. I watched his pupils contract. I've had legal ownership for 3 years, I said, tone flat. The shell company that licensed it to you? Legally mine. You've been paying me to use my software. Quietly, obediently. And now I slid over a manila folder with contracts printed, thick with options and clauses. Now we renegotiate. No way we're signing that, Tyler blurted, laughable in his bravado, like a chihuahua barking through a glass door. Oh, you will, I said, stepping closer to the screen. Because if you don't, slide 6 goes public. Click. Slide 6. A side-by-side of 2 data leaks, one minor, one catastrophic. The minor one, dated 2 years ago, was a warehouse inventory misfire. The catastrophic one? A still unreported payroll overwrite that temporarily duplicated bonuses to the wrong set of employees, both caused by the same lazy patch to my code, a patch they implemented without my approval. And here's the best part, I continued. When your auditors ask why these errors occurred, trace it to code modification after licensing, unauthorized tampering, that voids indemnity. Another board member sat back, rubbing his temple. You've basically got us by the throat, muttered the CFO. I shrugged. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for clarity. That was a lie, but it sounded good enough for the record. Marco's voice dropped, icy now. What do you want? I want you to remember every time you laughed, every time you dismissed me, every time you stole, copied and spun it like your own. I leaned forward, almost whispering. And I want your company's future to rest on monthly payments that go through my hands. Every update, every rollout, every feature you brag about in press releases, from now on I approve them, or I pull the plug. He looked like he wanted to lunge across the table, but his hands stayed clenched and trembling. Or, I added, like it was an afterthought, you can try to rebuild from scratch. The team that doesn't understand the guts of what they're running. See how your shareholders like that. The CTO cleared his throat. There's no time to migrate. The integrations are too deep. We'd collapse within a quarter. Marco's voice dropped to a whisper. So this was your plan all along? I just smiled. No, Marco. My plan was survival. You gave me the reason to evolve. He looked around the room. But no one met his eyes. They were already reading the contract. I hadn't even shown them slide 7 yet. Slide 7 wasn't for the board. It was for Marco, black background, white text. A quote timestamped, pulled from their internal Slack backups. Let the idiot starve. He'll be delivering DoorDash by June. Below it, a photo, cropped and enhanced, from the lobby camera the day I first pitched Sluice. I was holding my demo laptop, shoulders slumped, walking out as Tyler pointed at me through the glass, laughing. Nobody said a word. Marco's breathing changed. Shallow. He tried to compose his face, but the cracks were showing now. He looked older, smaller, like the mahogany walls of that boardroom were leaning in, mocking him the way he mocked me. Let me be very clear, I said, voice low and measured. You didn't just bet your company on my software. You bet it on me not finding out. You bet wrong. Tyler tried to break the tension with a laugh. Okay, but come on, man. Clearly won, right? Let's just all move forward, and did you just speak? I snapped, cutting him off so sharply it sucked the air out of the room. He froze. I stepped closer to his chair. I built this system during the worst years of my life. You mocked it, stole it, repurposed it. And you specifically thought it was funny to forward my pitch deck to your college group chat with the subject line cringe TXT. I pulled my phone from my pocket. You like to read your own DMs out loud. He sank in his seat. I turned back to Marco. You've got a choice, I said. Sign the license at 4x the current rate with mandatory technical oversight by my engineers, or I walk out. And every operation under your umbrella, logistics, payroll, vendor integrations, turns into static. He opened his mouth to speak, but I raised a hand. Oh, and about the IPO you've been quietly prepping. He slid another document across the table. The one pending SEC review? You'll need to disclose your ongoing licensing dispute. Guess how the market reacts to that? One of the older board members, a woman named Heller, looked at Marco with open disgust. You brought this company to its knees with ego, she said. Sign the damn agreement. The room turned. Marco was a monument crumbling in slow motion, dust rising with each breath. Picked up the pen with fingers that looked arthritic from tension. He signed, once, twice, third signature, and it was done. I collected the folder, nodded at Heller, and turned to leave, but I stopped at the door. Oh, one last thing. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small, black plaque. I handed it to the assistant by the projector. She read it aloud, eyes wide. This boardroom runs on Sluice, property of ARX Systems. It was engraved. Found it wherever the camera angle's best, I said, walking out. The next time you do a press release about innovation, I want your followers to know who built your future. The door shut behind me, and for the first time in 5 years, the hallway didn't feel cold. I didn't check my phone until I was 3 blocks away. By then, the news was already breaking. Notifications flooded my screen like a dam burst. Paragon Tech had just finalized a $25 million investment round. Their stock was jumping, and the world outside that boardroom was all about the big play, except, of course, they didn't know that the big play was still being played on my terms. I sat at a red light, watching the busy downtown streets blur in front of me. People hurried, oblivious. Cars honked. Traffic signs blared the usual empty promises. All I could think about was the way Marco looked when he signed. I hadn't expected him to cave so quickly. But seeing him write his name on that dotted line, his final submission to the very thing he spent years undermining, there was something oddly satisfying about it. I didn't celebrate, not yet. I wasn't done yet. The deal was done, sure, but there were still loose ends. There were always loose ends. Back at the office, the phone was ringing. My assistant, Claire, picked up, and I could hear the hesitation in her voice. "Sir, there's someone here to see you." I glanced at the clock. It was barely noon. "Who?" "Marco Fields." The words hit me like a surprise punch. I told Claire to send him up. Part of me was curious, but a larger part of me wasn't about to let him off the hook that easy. He didn't wait long. The door opened with the softest click, and Marco stepped inside, different from the arrogant CEO who had rejected my pitch years ago. He looked like a man who'd lost a war, but wasn't ready to admit defeat. "You wanted to see me?" His voice was hoarse, the kind of weariness that comes only after a long stretch of denial. "Sit down," I said, motioning to the chair across from me. I didn't stand up, didn't offer him a drink. This wasn't about hospitality. He took the chair, hands clasped together, leaning forward like he was bracing for impact. "What's next?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. I studied him, watching the way he tried to mask his fear with the same tired bravado he'd worn in the boardroom. It was clear he still didn't get it. He thought this was some kind of negotiation, some temporary setback he could spin. "It's simple," I said. "You keep the job, I get the profits." "Profits?" His laugh came out weak. He was trying to reclaim some ground he'd already lost. "This company was never about profits for you, was it?" I raised an eyebrow. "You think this was personal?" "No," Marco shot back. "I think it was about control. You want to crush us, don't you? You want us to remember you as the one who taught us a lesson." I leaned back, folding my arms. "Funny, that's what I thought you'd say. But if you'd paid attention, you'd realize I'm not here to destroy Paragon Tech. I'm here to help you fix it. If you want to keep playing the game, you'll play it my way. My engineers, my audits, my oversight. Or you can try to rebuild and watch everything fall apart." Marco stared at the floor, the weight of the reality finally hitting him. There was no savior coming, no grand gesture that could reverse the deal. I held all the cards, and he was stuck holding his own version of defeat, carefully hidden behind that facade of control. "Do what I can to keep this company afloat," he said, the words slow and heavy. "You do that," I said, smiling for the first time since I walked into that room. "But remember, you're welcome." The door clicked behind him, and for a brief moment I could breathe again. But then the phone rang again, and Claire's voice, now a little strained, cut through the silence. "Sir, there's someone else here. It's Tyler. He says he's here to make things right." Tyler. Name rang in my ears like a bad joke. I could already hear him in my head, fumbling over his words, trying to salvage whatever shred of dignity he thought he still had left. The kid who once laughed at my demo like it was a punchline, now standing at my door, hoping for some kind of redemption. The irony wasn't lost on me. I rubbed my temples, leaning back in my chair. "Send him in, Claire." A minute later, the door cracked open. Tyler stepped in, looking the way a person does after realizing they've bitten off more than they can chew. His suit was too tight, too formal for someone who probably had no idea how to tie a tie without a YouTube tutorial. His hands were twitching, like he wasn't sure whether to extend them for a handshake or shove them in his pockets. I didn't bother standing. "Take a seat, Tyler. We're not here for pleasantries," hesitated for a moment before lowering himself into the chair opposite mine. His eyes darted around the room, scanning everything but me, as though avoiding the inevitable confrontation. He finally settled on my eyes, bright, wide with uncertainty, like a kid caught sneaking into the candy jar. I know what you're thinking, Tyler began, his voice shaky. But listen, stop. I raised my hand, cutting him off before he could finish. I'm not interested in excuses. His face twisted, something between confusion and embarrassment. He opened his mouth to speak again, but closed it just as quickly. The reality of the situation was sinking in. You know, Tyler, I continued, when you laughed at my code, I thought you were just a kid with too much time and too little understanding. But this, I leaned forward. This is you trying to save your ass. And frankly, it's too little, too late. He shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to the door as if wondering if he could just bolt and leave me with the mess he helped create. But he didn't move. I'm not here to ruin you, Tyler, I said, my voice low but sharp. I'm here because I need you to understand something. You never took me seriously. You dismissed me, thought I was a joke. Well, now you're the one getting played. You're not just a pawn in this game, Tyler. You're the one who handed over the queen. Now you're wondering why everything's falling apart. He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. I know I screwed up. I know what we did to you, what I did. I didn't mean for things to go this far. Marco, he pushed me into it. Save it. I slammed my hand on the desk, cutting off his rambling. His eyes shot up to meet mine, wide and panicked. He was still waiting for some sort of redemption, some way out of this, but there was no escape. Don't get to play the victim here, Tyler. You were part of it. You made decisions, you made calls. And now you're here begging for forgiveness like that somehow makes you innocent. It doesn't, and neither does your apology. I stood up, walking around the desk slowly. Every step I took seemed to weigh heavier than the last. Tyler didn't move. He just watched me, his face a mixture of fear and confusion, unable to understand the full scope of what he had done. Want redemption? I stopped in front of him, looking down at him like I was gazing at someone who didn't exist anymore. You want to fix this? Get out of my office. Walk back into that boardroom. Tell Marco he's going to have to get his shit together, or I'll make his bankruptcy public. Then maybe, just maybe, you'll start earning your place in this company. I leaned in closer, my voice a mere whisper. If you think for 1 second that you're going to walk out of here and suddenly become a hero, think again. You're nothing more than a footnote in my story, Tyler. A reminder of why I never gave up. His eyes were wide, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. He was trying to process the weight of the decision, trying to figure out a way to keep his job without completely giving up his soul. But he was too far gone. You're not even a threat to me anymore, I said. Just a reminder of who you used to be. Now get out. He didn't say a word. He stood up and stumbled out of the room, his shoulders hunched in defeat. And I didn't feel the slightest hint of sympathy. Not for him, not for anyone in that company. This wasn't about redemption. This was about retribution. The rest of them, Marco, Tyler, every last one of them, could burn for all I cared. But the business, the software, that was mine. It was going to stay that way. And as the door clicked shut behind him, I knew this was only the beginning. The days blurred after Tyler's visit. It was like everything slowed down, yet somehow moved too fast. The press releases, the news outlets covering Paragon Tech's emergency upgrades, the investors clapping themselves on the back for securing the future with an enterprise-grade platform. And all of it was on my terms. Every single line of code they celebrated, every headline that called them the innovators of the year. It was all built on a foundation I had created while working in the shadows, only to have them laugh, copy, and steal. And now they were paying for it. Paying for the silence I'd kept while they thought they were winning. But I wasn't done yet. The emails kept coming. Investors, media, press. They wanted statements, quotes, insight into the visionary mind behind the software. I could feel their desperation through the screen. Wanted a hero, someone to lift them from the ashes they'd created. But they weren't going to find one in me. I didn't care about the spotlight. Then came the message that changed everything. It was from Marco, not the PR drone, not the lawyer trying to smooth things over. It was Marco himself. Can we talk? It took everything in me not to laugh. The arrogance, the audacity. 2 weeks ago, he didn't think I was worth a damn. Now, here he was, crawling back into my world like a rat scurrying to avoid the inevitable. I replied immediately. You have 3 minutes, get to the point. He was quick to respond. I want to meet, in person, just you and me. No lawyers, no assistants. Can we do that? I didn't even hesitate. Sure, I'll be there in an hour. When I walked into the cafe, Marco was already sitting at the back table, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His suit was wrinkled, the tie askew. Guy was unraveling, and it didn't take much to see it. He was no longer the polished, arrogant CEO. He was a shell, weighed down by the reality I'd imposed on him. I sat down across from him, my coffee untouched, eyes never leaving his. "I'm listening," I said. Marco glanced around nervously before leaning in, as if afraid someone would overhear. "Look, I know how this looks," he began, his voice trembling, "but I was just doing my job. I was trying to protect the company. I didn't know things would get so out of hand." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. It never came. This wasn't a man trying to manipulate me anymore. This was a man begging for mercy. "What exactly are you asking for?" I finally spoke. "I'm asking for a chance to fix this," he said, desperation creeping into his voice. "I know you have control now, I get it, but I'm not asking for it back. Me stop you there," I said, cutting him off. "You're not asking for anything. Not from me, not anymore. You lost that privilege the moment you stole my work. The moment you laughed and told your team to bury the code. You forfeit your right to ask for anything." Marco's face turned pale. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. "You see, Marco," I continued, leaning forward, "you've been playing catch-up your whole life. And now I'm the one with the keys to the kingdom. And you're just a player in my game." I let that sink in for a moment before adding, "The difference is I'm not playing to win. I'm playing to watch you lose." His jaw tightened. For a second, I thought he might snap, but he didn't. He just nodded, defeated. That was it. The moment he realized the game was over. The moment he understood that there was no coming back from this. I stood up to leave, pushing my chair back slowly. "Enjoy the rest of your day, Marco. You've earned it." I didn't turn around when I walked out. There was no need. I could already feel the weight lifting off my shoulders. But as I stepped into the bright sun, my phone buzzed again. Another notification. Another headline. Paragon Tech's future uncertain. Licensing dispute and software legitimacy under scrutiny. The world didn't know it yet. They didn't know the true story. But they would. I was going to make sure they remembered the name ARX Systems long after the dust settled. The following week felt like one long exhale. The weight of the battle, the tension, the waiting, everything had been building up to this point, but the aftermath was a slow burn. I didn't feel elated. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt satisfied. The kind of satisfaction that comes from knowing you've completely flipped the script. You've turned the table so thoroughly that the other side doesn't even recognize the playing field anymore. Paragon Tech had announced a press conference. The CEO was going to address the licensing issue head-on, they said. Of course, they weren't calling it a mistake. They were calling it a discrepancy in communications. It didn't take a genius to know that was just a fancy way of saying, "We've been caught with our pants down, and now we need to spin it." I was watching it all unfold, sitting in the same dimly lit office I'd spent years in, writing code, sending emails, fighting for survival in the margins. No one could have known that the guy in the background, the one they laughed at, was going to be the one pulling the strings behind their multi-billion-dollar tech empire. I kept the remote in my hand, my finger hovering over the pause button. I wanted to hear Marco squirm. I wanted to see the confession that would inevitably come. There was something more satisfying in knowing I didn't need to be there to see it. This was my final victory, my absence, my quiet. The press conference began. Marco stood at the podium, flanked by board members and lawyers, his face already pale under the stage lights. The tension in the room was palpable. I could almost taste his fear through the screen. He cleared his throat, looking at the reporters in front of him. "We're here today to address some recent discrepancies regarding our licensing practices." He trailed off for a moment, the words clearly difficult to get out. "We have come to terms with the fact that our reliance on an external vendor, one of our own internal systems, has led to certain misunderstandings." The reporters exchanged glances. There was no applause for him, just silence. Marco continued, his voice slightly shaking. "Are committed to resolving these issues with full transparency. And to that end, we've decided to increase our partnership with ARX Systems in a way that allows us to better integrate their technology into our future projects." I hit pause. That was it. The moment I knew they were in deeper than they could admit. It wasn't just about fixing their software problem anymore. It was about buying time, about keeping face, about pretending they could still be the company everyone thought they were. I didn't need to watch the rest. There was no real victory speech for me, no round of applause. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that the balance had shifted completely. They couldn't hide behind their marketing anymore. They couldn't pretend their enterprise solutions were anything more than a patchwork of stolen code. A week later, the contract for the new licensing deal was signed. RX Systems now owned 10% of Paragon Tech's core operations, and I wasn't just the guy they had to pay. I was the guy who held their future in his hands. Marco called once more, a final, desperate plea. He wanted to meet, he wanted to fix things, to reframe the narrative, to make it look like there was some sort of partnership. But I wasn't interested in partners. I was interested in control. I told him no. He hung up. It's like I knew he would. The game was over. They had lost. But the lesson, the real lesson, was never going to fade. Not for them, not for anyone watching. This wasn't just about business. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about survival. About knowing when to strike and when to walk away, leaving them in the dust. And when I finally stood up from my desk and walked out into the city, I didn't need to look back. I knew exactly where I was headed. To the top.